You know how salt works? I don't mean like in a chemistry sense. You don't have to know how sodium and chloride do their chemical bonding stuff, but even at a most basic level, how salt works when you put it in food or you even put some on your driveway to melt the snow. The salt has to give itself away, right? It has to dissolve, right? You pour the salt out of the shaker. Salt's no good if it just stays here in its little container. It's got to be sprinkled out on your food or scattered out on your driveway or put in the meat you're using to preserve it and make jerky. In other words, the way salt does what it's supposed to do is by giving itself away. You could call it dissolving or melting or whatever, but salt has to give itself away. You put salt in something that isn't salt to help make that other thing better, to make it more like itself, right? If you put so much salt on your food that all you can say is, this tastes salty, you kind of miss the point. You put just enough so that it helps bring out the flavor. It tastes more like what it's supposed to taste like. The chicken tastes more chickeny, the steak tastes more steaky, your mashed potatoes are more mashed potato-y. If you only taste salt, you're doing something wrong. But the salt has to give itself away. Similarly, how does a match or an oil lamp work sources of light like in Jesus' day? The flame has to give itself away, right? The flame burns up some sort of fuel source, and then it can provide light. In Jesus' day, there's no electric lights above that are giving a source of light. So the only kind of light sources people are used to are oil lamps, candles, some rudimentary form of matches or fire or kindling, where the source of light gives itself away, burns itself up so that there can be light in a dark place. That's how salt works too. That's how light works. Both are this image of something that's put into the midst of a wider space to give itself away to make the whole thing better. It's interesting that Jesus uses those two images side by side as he talks about the presence of the people of God in the world. When he talks about us being the salt of the earth, when he talks about people being light for the world, like a city on a hill or a lamp that you don't put under a bushel basket but put high on a lampstand so everybody can see it, those are images not of power and domination and controlling. The salt isn't supposed to dominate the flavor of the food. The light isn't supposed to be overpowering and blinding. Both are images of something giving itself away. The salt that melts itself away, that dissolves into the food to make it taste better, that melts the ice on your driveway. The light that burns up the fuel in order to bring light to a dark place. The way Jesus talks about our presence in the world, the way Jesus talks about God's presence in the world, is self-giving love. This Sunday we're going to hear this next section of the Sermon on the Mount. And if we try and understand the Sermon on the Mount not as a list of things you have to do to make yourself acceptable or something only for the future when we get to heaven, but Jesus' picture of here's what it looks like where God reigns, right? Here's what the kingdom of God, the reign of God looks like. Well, all of a sudden it starts to make a whole new kind of sense. And the Beatitudes, the blessing statements we heard last week take on a whole new feel. This is not a checklist of things you have to be at least one of these 9 things or else you don't get into the club, but rather here's the kind of priorities that God has. Here's what God considers blessed. Here's the kind of people God is particularly looking out for. Here's the kind of things God is particularly interested in blessing or prospering. And similarly, when Jesus looks out at the people listening to him and says, you're the salt for the whole world, you're the light for the earth, the image is we're meant to be in the world as this presence that gives ourselves away. And that kind of presence of self-giving love becomes the way that God's kingdom, God's reign becomes seen and known in the world, because that's how God rules the world. So often we hear talk about kingdoms or reign or administration, and we assume it's sort of this top-down dictatorship of somebody with a lot of power dominating and controlling and conquering. That's what everybody in Jesus' day had heard when they'd seen the Romans come, and before then the Greeks, and before then a laundry list of other empires, all doing this very top-down, tyrannical, dictatorial, authoritarian, you will do what I say or we'll crush you kind of rule. And Jesus comes onto the scene saying that's not how God's reign works. God's kind of rule, God's kind of reign, God's kingdom, so to speak, is about self-giving love. It rules the same way salt gives itself away for the improvement of the whole dinner, the way it melts and gives itself away so that your driveway is clear, the way the lamp burns up the fuel inside so that there can be light in a dark place. This is how God rules the world. This is the way we're called to be a witness in our lives as well. This Sunday we're going to take a look at what would it mean in our lives to be that kind of presence. What would happen if people, when they take a look at our lives, find what's most remarkable is the way we give ourselves away. And that maybe when people see that, they'll say, oh, that's what God's love is like. That's what God's kind of power is like. People want to be drawn to be a part of that kind of God's community. That's the conversation we're having this Sunday. Join us for that. See you then.